Check, check. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to evening 2 of the 2024 Pre-Writing Studio evening events. Just letting everyone know that we are standing by to start in 10 minutes. Feel free to grab a drink at the bar, say hi to your neighbor, and feel free to browse Dubbing 62 exhibition on view.
Hi, good night, everyone. If you would like to take a look at the gallery displays, both displays are open. You guys can take a quick look while we wait to start.
Good evening, everyone. We are about to start. I'm asking Kai. Kai, we are getting ready to start. Please stand by. Good evening again, everyone. Welcome to the second evening of the 2024 Pre-Writing Studio Evening events. Show of hands if you were here yesterday evening. Keep your hands up if you're feeling cooler this evening. All right, give it up for the event promoters, everybody, and the porta-coolers that are here today. So this evening, we are going to have a two-part program. We're beginning with a conversation between Kei Miller and Dr. Erna Brodber about deslaving information. That will be followed by a Q&A, and then we're going to go to a break, followed by part two, where we'll have some readings by Garnette Cadogan, Roland Watson Grant, and Annie Paul. Unfortunately, Nadi Edwards was unavailable to join us this evening. At this time, I'm going to ask both Kei Miller and Dr. Brodber to join us towards the front of the audience as I introduce them both. Erna Brodber has been called one of Jamaica's great literary figures of contemporary times and is best known for such novels as Mayal and Louisiana, and for a number of historical and sociological studies. A historian, fiction writer, sociologist, and community activist, Dr. Brodber is a 2017 winner of the Wyndham Campbell Prize, She's also won a Prince Claus Award in 2006, as well as a Jamaica Musgrave Medal in 1999. Her latest novel is called Nothing's Math, that was produced in 2014. Among the memorable titles of her numerous articles and book chapters are A Study of Yards in the City of Kingston, Oral Sources and the Creation of the Social History of the Caribbean, Re-Engineering Black Space, The Emergence of Reggae, a 1986 review, and Fiction in the Scientific Procedure. The last mentioned article makes the intimate connection with her other passion, in that between her formal sociological interventions, Dr. Brodber, through her novels, has emerged as one of the leading contemporary writers from the Commonwealth Caribbean. From Jane and Louisa Will Soon Come Home in 1980, through Mayal in 1988, Louisiana in 1994, The Rainmaker's Mistake in 2006, and The World is a Hill in 2012. Dr. Brodber has developed a distinct voice with an acute appreciation of the social, cultural, and oral spaces of Jamaica and other venues of African diaspora. Dr. Brodber has just completed 2 book-length manuscripts. One, a history of her family in Woodside, St. Mary, going back to the 18th century, titled The Brodbers and Jamaica, 1722 to 1922, An Intimate History. And the other, a collection of short stories titled Man and Woman. Please make her feel welcome. Erna Brodber will be in conversation with none other than Kei Miller. And if you were here yesterday, you can keep clapping as he's been introduced again for the second time. Kei Miller is a poet who has been making a furore in the international scene since his first collections, Kingdom of Empty Bellies in 2006. Since then, he's moved into fiction and essay writing. His collections and novels have won numerous awards, up to and including his most recent essay collection, Things I Have Withheld. Have you read that book? He writes in a highly original and clever way about a variety of social issues and does not shy away from the taboos in them. As one writer reviews his work is daring, unforgettable, and he moves from cozy to tragic to sublime in a single line. He knows how to put into words a feeling of alienation like none other. Among other things, Kei is known for mixing English with patois in his work, which produces beautiful poems, such as the poem Place Name from the collection The Cartographer Tries to Map His Way to Zion. That collection won the Forward Prize for Best Collection of Poetry, and in 2010, Kei received the Silver Musgrave Medal from the Institute of Jamaica for his contribution to literature. In addition to being a writer, Kei is also a lecturer, and he has taught at several universities, including the University of Glasgow, Royal Holloway, and he's currently a professor at the University of Miami. And this evening, Kei and Erna Brodber will be in conversation regarding de-slaving information. So you're encouraged to note all questions. Towards the end of the session, we will open the floor for questions and comments. Please make them feel welcome.
I have no idea. Hi everyone. How are you all doing tonight? Can you hear me well? Yeah. I'm not sure about the umbrella of de-slaving information, but we'll try to talk about it. That's what we're laughing about a while ago. He said, "You understand what that means?" She's like, "No." I said, "Me don't know." I think it's you. It's not you. Anyway, we're just going to have a conversation, right? I've wanted to talk to Erna for a very long time. And I will start by this. It's not the first question, but it's something I want to thank Erna for. In my I guess when I was just coming to writing, one of the first books that came to me was Mayal by Erna. And there's a story, there's a main story that's happening, but there's another story that haunts it, which really Erna is critiquing. What I realized afterwards was an actual Jamaican primer that was given to school children. And in it is a story of farm animals who are on the farm, and they too are waiting for liberation and emancipation and freedom to happen. And one by one, them walk off from the farm. The horse walk off, the donkey walk off, everybody walk off from the farm. by the end of the story, one by one, they come back. The horse comes back because nobody gives him his sugar lumps anymore. And the chicken comes back. All of them come back into their enslavement. The teacher who is meant to teach the story, she can't teach it anymore. And there's this moment where the pastor is pressing her and saying, why can't you teach this story? And he says, what is your problem with the writer? And finally she gets to it. And she says, my problem with the writer is he has robbed his character of their possibilities. And in the words of young people today, that landed. And that has always been one of the most fundamental principles of my fiction. I must never rob my characters of their possibilities. And Erna gave me that. And I just thank you for being such a powerful influence on how I write. And, genuinely thanks. You have a mic, by the way?
I haven't been given one. I guess we will share.
No, there is a mic.
Oh, so we have to share?
No, there is a mic.
Hold on, let me just work it out. Or is it on?
Hello, yes, it is on.
Yeah. Sorry, what you were saying?
I was just saying that if the light wasn't in my eye, I would see me smiling. Yes, because I did like that, what you have said, and I'm glad that I have moved at least one person.
At least one?
Yeah, at least
I
one.
mean, I know several, but at least one.
At least one.
Yeah. This is where I want to start. In an interview with Carolyn, I think this is in... Is the interview in the back of The World is a High Hill? I think it's there.
Yes.
But you make mention, I think Carolyn asks, you are imagining yourself at the start of your career, the start of what has become this amazing career. But how you said it is that at that point you simply wanted to be of service to your people. And I want to start there. What does that mean? Who are your people? And what is the service that they needed?
Shall we start with who are my people? My people are the descendants of Africans enslaved in the New World. Those are my people. And they need a lot of help. And they did need a lot of help. No point saying that the slavery business wasn't nice. But the part that bothers me most is the emancipation, which was a joke. Mm-hmm. Right, and that turned a whole people away from everything. And part of my business is to help with the emancipation, which did not take place.
Right.
Help with the emancipation. And the emancipation can't take place unless something happens up here, so. Mm-hmm. Because, as you see from Maya, a lot of foolishness was told to us and taught to us. And we consider it to be sense. And we walk around with this foolishness till we can't even find ourselves. So we can't even emancipate ourselves. And everybody know about Marcus Garvey and Bob Marley. Emancipate yourselves. You have to do it. And you can't do it if your head's spinning around with a whole pile of foolishness, which have nothing at all to do with you. So part of my business is to see if I can straighten out that foolishness and help people to put some sense in their head so that they can do the emancipation.
Sorry. So we're live streaming, so we need to hold the mic closer so that
All right.
Yeah, let's go there. I mean, you have been pointing us to trying to get us to pay attention to this moment. There's so much work you have done in reestablishing emancipation in Jamaica as a moment that we have to come back to. It's back on the calendar. But can you just talk more about that? Because I think you have been leading us there for so long. And why I wanted to come to Woodside, I've been trying to get to Woodside to talk to Erna. It's because probably in the last 2 years, I felt, oh my God, that is the moment we need to come back to. Not just slavery, but emancipation. What did not happen at that moment? What should have happened at that moment? Why was emancipation a joke, a tragedy? What is it around that moment that you're trying to get us to focus on? And why?
Okay, well, since people giving thanks, since we sat down here, let me give thanks to somebody whose name I've really quite forgotten. But he's one of the 100 people that I interviewed who were born in the late 19th century, early 20th century. I was interviewing him about X, Y, and Z, and then it got around to slavery and emancipation. And he looked at me and saw that I come from the learned people and I come from university. And he said to me, you know, you people sell we out. We feel that you don't give up emancipation. You know, give up August 1st and take on the other something, which is the other thing.
In progress. Thank you, friends.
Which is the other thing that is done on the 6th of August. He was very angry and he said, the old people not like that, you know. And I felt that I had been asked to do something. And it was from there I said that I have to bring back emancipation for these people. And I was lucky because I was asked by the government to do a review of their cultural development programs. And I was very happy to be able to tell them that you have to put back emancipation August 1st. You have to put back August 1st. You have to give back the people them August because they understood what it meant. And they felt that they were let down by people like me, which is why it's my job, by people like me who go to university and we head turn and we come out with the foolishness, like take away August from people and give them 6th of August. Right. So that is how my interest in it began. And then, of course, I moved from theory to action. So I had emancipation celebration in my yard, and people came, and then it got bigger and it got bigger, till people started come to the village, turned village now, where we had emancipation celebrations. And part of that emancipation celebration had to do with getting people to look back at them heritage in terms of beings, grandmother and stuff like that. Because I had in my academic, what it is now, conceit then, I had thought that one of the things I could do for my village and my people was to write their history. Then you write a history, you do all the research, and you go to this place, and you go to that place. And you write, and you write, and you write, and get something published. And who can read it? Who can read it? The man in Hanover who was telling me that we give away emancipation, he could not read it. And many people in my village could not read it either. So it called for something else. And the something else that it called for was a play in which the characters were the people in the village, the people's names, because I had done all the names of the people who were enslaved in the village. So we resurrected all of those people and made them come to 1st of August emancipation so that people could understand what emancipation was about. And not only what it was about, but how their particular people, family, were involved with it. That answers your question?
Yeah, definitely. How has that play, I mean, I've been there on August morning, but you have told, I mean, how has that play impacted actual people in the village? Because here are people who are enacting things of them family from generations before. Does it mean something for people who are remembering stories of their own people in the context of that play?
Well, some people, but I need to tell you something now. I'm laughing at myself. I did not realize that I went on from the emancipation play and all like that to arrange that a wall be done called the Wall of Honor with all the names of the people who were enslaved on the Woodside estate. But laughing at myself now, just last week, a lady came from somewhere else, because all of us are now from Woodside, people are all somewhere else. She was in class with me, and we were talking, you know, and she said, yes, I see that you put up my ancestors' name on this board here. And then she said, but we wasn't just slave, you know. We was something else. And it was then I understood that after all the trouble I got through, getting funding to put up this wall and all the rest of it, people might want anybody to know so they was slave. Because she was now saying it's not just slaves she was. There were mulattoes, so probably she was something else.
Right.
But I think she was thinking that probably there was overseer.
Overseer.
But there was no overseer. But you see, my point now is that I get myself in trouble now because I go put up all of these people's names and say that they was slave.
Right.
And so you have to do another thing now to go find out. Not just to find out if there was really slave, but to give much more humanity then to people who were slaves.
Yeah.
That is what you mean by enslaving? All right. Okay, then we understand.
Why are you clarifying there?
Carolyn's slaving information.
Yes, okay. It's not her. It's not her. It's live.
All right, okay. Really enslaving information?
Deslaving.
What did I mean? I would love to know because I'd love to respond.
But I'm thinking about these different projects, like putting on the play that gets people in your village interacting with history and information in a different kind of way. And you've often talked about that moment when, I think it was Swithin,
Could be Swithin, yes.
Swithin came to Woodside and told the story of St. Mary. I think one of the ways you tell the story is these two old women who were from 3 miles away refused to walk home because they were finally listening to the story of their people. And it seems so much of your work has been about finding non-academic spaces to allow black people to encounter information. And just how important is that? What has that project meant to find these spaces where we can find information, but is not in the space of the academy, of the university? How do we create those spaces even now?
Well, to big up Swithin too, because it was Swithin that sent me to write Woodside Petrie Grove Post Office, because when Swithin came down and gave this talk, and I see these two old women who were going to get a lift home and in car, and said, no, them can't leave, because when their history is being spoken, them can't leave. And keep on saying, then how we never know this, how we never know that. But the point that grabbed them was that Swithin was talking about their parish, emancipation in St. Mary. And they actually met the name of somebody, Mr. Williams. And lots of people could say, but my grandfather used to talk about Mr. Williams. So it's true Mr. Williams did get the vote. You know, it's only him wanted to get vote in this village. So it brings the whole history to make sense to people. They know somebody who was in history and somebody whose name right down in history. So that is the kind of thing that it does for people.
Right.
And it was, what is the name of it when you photograph something? Video. It was videoed.
Oh, right.
And that video has gone really over a lot of places.
Right.
Yeah.
Tell me about, again, just thinking about these kinds of spaces that you create where, again, activism can happen, where history can happen, where work and thought can happen. But tell me about Black Space. What's going on with Black Space now? What is Black Space?
I know that I would come to that. I would know I'd come to that. Everybody's asking what is Black Space. All right. Well, let me start.
Or what was Black Space?
What becomes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, let me start in an uncomfortable place. Annie, you are in this one. The Salises, what is the name again? The ISA. Over at a conference, somebody whispered in my ear and said, "You know that we're not renewing your contract, you know." All right. That was it. So I had to leave. But I left knowing what I, as what Lloyd West would call an intellectual scholar. No, not intellectual worker. I, as an intellectual worker, had work to do. And I was not the end of my life. So I went down to my village now, and that was a whole beautiful space where I could use all of what I learned. I could use my history, I could use my sociology, and I had some experience in psychiatry. I had a fellowship once in anthropological psychiatry. So I could use all of this in my village. I see I was just too small for me now. Okay. Right. So down in the village there, once again, I had the idea that people want to know their history. And there was a group of girls meeting. And they asked me if I could help. And I said, I can help. But the only thing I have can help you with is what is in my head. If you want it, you get it. But that is all I have. And so we used to have these meetings where they were advised about themselves. We would read all sorts of books, all of them having to do with ourselves. Very often, it's just three of us reading because nobody else either can read or can understand. So we very often didn't get very far past preface. But we had friends at the university who were very nice people, like G. Beck and so on. And they would come down. They would come down to Woodside and help the people to understand what they had written. So we wanted to, our intellectual workers were now going to be made sensitive to what people, the people that they're so-called writing about and analyzing what they... So that is how the thing started. But it got called Black Space because I and a whole lot of others knew that the space that we were into, from the time we went into ABC, right up to 6th class, right up to high school, right up to university, was white space. When I went into university, I went to do an honors course in history. The reason I did an honors course because at my interview for my scholarship, I told the people interviewing me that what I wanted to do was to work for my people. And they said, what you must do then is go to honors history, which I did. After 3 years of honors history, I could tell you a lot about Britain and what Britain did to St. Vincent, but I could not tell you about the people of St. Vincent. I knew then that I was in white space, and I would have to get out of white space somehow if I wanted to be real. And so the idea now was to see if we could fill black space with information. Okay, so that is what black space is, filling up black space. That is what we do. And this is where we started with the girls and with the university people coming down. And we moved on to other things. We moved on to having the emancipation celebrations and letting the children understand what it is that they're celebrating. So we had Emancipation Summer School as well. And a lot of my friends from abroad came down to work in Emancipation Summer School. And after we finished with summer school, we said to ourselves, what we're going to do with ourselves. So we sit down and we decide to discuss things. And among kinds of things that come up is that a friend of mine who was teaching in North America was advising us how difficult it is to teach black students. One of them said, you bring in what's the name of the people who are Nigerians, religious people? You bring in a Babylon to tell the class about religion in Africa. Then you see the black children face makeup. And afterwards them say, them shame. Why you shame them bringing this black man to come talk about this bogus religion? Okay. So it was very necessary for us to find some ways of making our own students understand what it is that is really our past and ours. Okay. Mm-hmm. So we would sit around and wonder after we are done with the school children, how is it we're going to do this? And this is where Black Space really took on its academic thing. Okay. And then we moved from that to widening this. We had a meeting with two heads of the head of the Baptist Church and the head of the one that has R in it. No, not Roman Catholic. The one that
not Revival.
No. Anyhow, you know what it is. You know what it is. It is one of them high up churches, Anglican and stuff like that. Okay. I just simply remember right now. But they were at that meeting, and
Moravian?
we had.
Moravian?
Not Moravian.
We start with R. Sorry.
It's not Presbyterian either.
We will get there by the end.
All right, well, the end. It have three letters in it. It have three letters, like MRC. It have three letters. No, 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 no. I will go on. It does not matter. It was these three head of churches who leave their church Sunday morning to come down to me to have this discussion, which was called a part of Black Space. And at that time, we had a couple lawyers there too, and that kind of person who was there now. And our theme was, the people who are being killed look like us. The people who are killing look like us. What are we who look like them going to do about it? That was what we started off. That's the kind of thing we moved into. And we moved into more and more of these kinds of things so that our meetings now were being announced by, over by Kabu, over by that program, Kabu's program, Running African. And people were taking bus and coming all the way from St. Thomas and all about to our meetings with nowhere to sit because all I have is 30 chairs. Nowhere to sit, catching up to listen to these things. But what we were doing then was only doing lectures like happening in university anywhere. People were not getting a chance to interact, you know. So we moved from that now to looking at ourselves who had been doing some of the lecturing and see that we ourselves don't know very much either. We don't know very much either because our grandparents knew stuff, but we were taught that our grandparents are idiots and don't know nothing. So we never take it in. So we ourselves are crazy, don't know what we are, because we never listen to them. So the new part of Black Space now is when we admit that we don't know nothing, and we have to now ask our grandparents. So the session that is coming up is what grandfather knew. Mm-hmm. And we're wanting to give what they knew some respect. And we are hoping, we also know that if we knew what they knew, we will now go on to start doing our own building. So we now have reached a point in Black Space where we know as people who have degree and of people who are intellectual workers that we don't know nothing. And we have to start again to start learning what it was about. We've done a lot of work on the spirit because, as you know, the spirit is a very strong notion among us. But we don't learn nothing of it in university.
Right.
A man said to you, "My spirit take you," and you know where that is going. All right, okay. Or somebody said, "My spirit not take her," you know, and you know says another kind of fight that. Okay.
Yeah.
So the spirit is a strong movement. The spirit is a thing. The spirit is extremely important to us. Okay. Yeah. So we learned from that. The next thing we're going to do, come the end of July, is we're going to look at mind. When somebody say, "You're too damn bad mind," what actually is being said? What is that about? Okay. So we begin to understand what our people were using these things, what it is that they meant. And we codify these now, and we hope to give it back now to schools and give it back to everybody else so that our grandpeople's sense of what the world is can be shared by their grandchildren eventually. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, let's hear it.
I was going to ask you another question, but Annie has found the de-slaving quote. So I'm going to pass the mic to... No, man, they want to hear your voice for a little.
Okay. Yes, I mean, I was being accused of making this up, so... This is from an essay Erna wrote called History and Social Death, in which she was engaging Orlando Patterson's essay, book on social death. And she says, as Patterson reminds us, everything has a history, even sticks and stones. The de-slaving, to coin a word, information we need, is information on our heritage. As researchers, we have to be about social recreation rather than chronicling, about writing, and in those days, as in the New Testament, rather than who begat whom and who fought what war, as in the Old Testament. History has the capacity to confound social death. Patterson's analysis leads us to believe something that our ex-slave societies need. Do you remember now?
I don't remember having said that, but I have said that kind of thing I have said that kind of thing time and time and time again. It seems I can write nothing that doesn't deal with this business of knowing your ancestors if you are to avoid social death. Okay. From the translation for me is, if you are to get out of slavery, you're going to have to de-slave. And de-slave involves knowing about yourself and knowing about your ancestors. And respecting, not just knowing, because, I mean, you can jump up on the stage at in the summer coming here and do all sorts of things and don't know what they mean. And not only don't know what they mean, but thinking that is a joke.
Right.
When in fact, these are very important things to our people that you should know. Okay.
There is, in this work that needs to be done amongst our people, my people, your people, certainly in your fiction, there is, to me, sometimes a kind of wild generosity of the people who become involved in that work. I'm thinking of Mayal, and even the moment of each of the pastors, both the Anglican pastor in a more passive way, but the Methodist pastor as well, being involved in the spirit work of reclaiming, of black people reclaiming themselves. Certainly maybe in Brassington, the white woman is deep in the spirit community of this village. And that was always moving to me, how these people who belong to a faith that I think of as aggressive sometimes towards, aggressively oppressive towards black identity, you have them in that village all working towards, and there's a generosity there. Can you talk about that, the people involved in the work of recognizing us?
It is called hope.
Right.
It's all hope, okay. And as I tell you, we had a session with the two heads of, the head of the Baptist Union and the head of the other one whose name I can't remember, were there at a Black Space meeting. Okay.
All right.
Okay. And I speak to them. And they get tied up like all of us.
Right.
Okay, they wanted job, and not only job, they wanted to do some work. And this is what work pointed to, the ministry and things like that. And why are they going to analyze stuff when they know they can't analyze it? They never do it in Parsons School. Why are they going to come out by themselves now and do it? So they carry on with the same Holy Ghost business. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Until they get the courage to come out and say something else or do something else. Okay.
But it's just that I talk about Mayal now 2 times. There's a face-to question I want that don't have nothing to do with what we were talking about before, but because I just remember, I had this weird eureka moment rereading Rachel Manley's Drumblier recently, and is a scene where she's describing Norman Manley walking off the plane with Edna, and because he's away, the PNP, all kind of, to him, foolishness happens in the PNP because his sobriety is not there to stop the crowd from getting on. And so the Sweep Them Out campaign becomes a big thing. He comes back and the crowd is at the tarmac of Norman Manley Airport and they have up them broom, and Norman Manley is horrified by this display. And it's Edna who has to talk him down and say, let the people have them say. And in that moment, I was watching Nadine Brassington and her husband. It was the white woman who, from England, who had a sensitivity that the brown man from Jamaica, because he was brown, could not perform it. And his wife had to kind of gently lead him and say, no, let the people have them say. And suddenly now I reread Mayal after that, and I cannot say Nadine and her husband as anything else but Norman and
right,
Edna.
and I didn't know about that. I didn't know about that Norman and Edna thing.
This is what I wanted to know from time.
No, I did
if you were conscious of it.
I did not know anything at all about that.
Wow.
But I know that there are white people who can help. There are white people who can help. And it's not every one of them can help. I have a friend who said to me, Erna, Una must stop, not Una because she's white, she's English. You must stop writing in this language. You need to have us, we need to understand what you're saying because we want to help you, or we can't help you if we don't understand what you're saying. Then she turned around and said, yes, Erna, I really know you tell me already you don't write for white people.
This is Evelyn.
No, this is just a friend of mine who
Okay.
happens to be white. Okay. But I don't cross them out.
Yeah.
I don't cross them out. Made in Brassington had a right to be there.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Right,
you've always approached the work, again, with it's interesting you creating, this thing that to some people can read as radical in a certain kind of way, and it is. But at the same time, you're creating black space. You write, where are the others?
Yes.
And it is this call for me to do my work, I need everybody in Jamaica to tell their stories. I need
Yes.
Chinese people to tell their
Yes,
story.
yes. Mhm.
I need,
But it doesn't mean that everybody have to jump onto the same train.
absolutely.
What I am hoping is that I tell my story, my Irish friend tell them story, my Chinese friends tell them story, and we reach each other's story. Because I really do not believe in this join up business.
Okay.
Okay, no,
We're not there yet. Huh?
No, we're not out of many one people yet. Okay.
Tell me about that. That was actually one of the questions on my list, and I thought that too provocative to bring up. But how useful is our motto? What does it do?
Well, I don't know about that, but I know what is mine. My notion is of a set of crockery plates lined up on top of each other, but one of them skew. And if one of them skew, the whole of them go and drop down and mash up in no time. And that is it for me. We have allowed the people, the descendants of Africans, to be a skewed plate. And there is nowhere the society is going until it deals with us.
I mean, one thing that hit me during, during COVID and the lockdowns and all the drama that happened that year, I was taken by how incisive, and Jamaicans could join in on it, the critique of all lives matter. We understood why that was racist, why every time a certain kind of person in America got uncomfortable with a conversation that centered black people and what needed to be done, they would jump up all lives matter because they were so uncomfortable by Black Lives Matter. But if we looked in Jamaica, every single time you try to have that conversation in Jamaica, what it's met with is out of many one people. And out of many one people does exactly the same work that All Lives Matter does. And I just find that obscene that our motto is all about silencing a conversation that we're uncomfortable with. And I just wonder, why do we have a motto that silences rather than a motto that allows us to meet each other as people and talk? But
I just say it's easier.
right.
It's just easier to put on them uniform. It's easier. You don't have to go the design done for yourself.
Yeah.
Okay.
What is the future of, trying to come to Woodside recently, I know things have changed a lot. And worse, COVID would have exacerbated some of those changes, right? People leave. You've talked about this a lot, that villages in Jamaica now, they don't grow. I went somewhere recently and I said, boy, they were doing up a whole pig roast. And I said, how many people are in this village now? And I remember just sitting back when the two of them started going, 1, 2,
Yeah.
3. And finally they came to the number and both of them at the same time said, 7. And I thought about the emptying of villages in Jamaica now. Is that a concern, which is happening around the world? Villages there's nobody there. They're just houses. They're just things that remain. What happens to villages like Woodside now? What are your concerns about the future?
I am very concerned, but I'm very happy that I'm 84. If I were not 84, I would be jumping about and seeing what I can do about it. But I cannot at my age do anything about it. But look and just say, well, this is really very odd. This Woodside school had 25 students and 5 teachers. And the government closed it down, which is fair enough. There is no school at Woodside. There's no Woodside school. The school I went to and my sister went to and my brothers went to does not exist. There is no school. And I do not know who understands what can happen when there's no school. I keep telling people that when there was school, and before there was 11 plus and all the rest of them, we took the Jamaica local exam. And the whole village was involved in that. When you're coming home from school, a man with a cutlass stop you and ask you if you reach Yang Kiao Pyong yet. That was a story in the Reader about Anansi and Yang Kiao Pyong. Okay. All right. And when you take exam, people know what these things are. Joshua and the son of Nun, and Joshua walking around the place and blowing the horn, and the place come down. So they talk with you about that. Mm-hmm. The talking together is a community-making thing. And what the school could do then, in the long, long time when I was at school, is this kind of community-making thing. The exam results came out in the Jamaica Gazette. And somehow people knew when the exam results were coming out. And the whole post office, full of people, just come to know who passed, and to congratulate who passed, and to ask them what they're doing further. This was community. Right. We don't have that anymore. Yeah. Because children not even going to the elementary school, once they, and for me, elementary school now is like Obia. The further you go to an Obia band, the better he is. So this better school, if you go into Carnal School, which is 2 miles away, Carnal School is better than Woodside School. Okay. So with that in mind, even though the birth rate in Woodside must it don't exist. A fella says him one doing anything can have 3 children. Right, okay. Yeah. So apart from the fact of how far school is better than near school, there's also the thing that there really is no children. Right. And I do not know why there's no children, because I see young men around the place and I see young women about the place. But they probably all took up 2 is too many.
Or 1 is too. I mean, I kind of asked that question thinking about what I see as the value of your scholarship, of your generation, and it feels to me, especially with the emancipation, you were at a particular point where you could interview that second generation of free men.
Yes.
It was almost like you were the last person who could still stand at that gap and interview them, and I am so grateful that you could stand in that gap and say, whoever need the information, I will stand, collect it, so who need it in the future, them can do something with it, but at least I'll be here to get it. It feels, looking at villages like Woodside, that we are at another moment where information is about to be lost. Mm-hmm. And if we don't look at those villages, look at what is about to be lost in terms of rural life in Jamaica, that we might miss something. And that's why I'm asking this, what happens and what do we need to do? Because I think on some level those changes are inevitable, but what can we do to preserve what we are at risk of losing right now?
Well, for me, I have to drop out. But as I've said, if you're doing something and there's nobody to come behind you and pick it up, then you waste your time. Okay. So I have to now stand back and watch and hope that the person comes along. I am fortunate, and Woodside is fortunate in that the people have come along. Okay. The people who have come along are the Tainos. And if you looked at, I think it's the Sunday Gleaner, you will see a picture of a Taino bred man on the front page. He belongs to us now because the work I did pointed out that there were Tainos in Woodside from long, long time. Mm-hmm. And so the Tainos have come now, and they have taken over. And I am so grateful for them. And I know that Woodside will be up again with the Tainos taking over.
Great. This is my final question, and then I'll leave it to the audience to ask a few things, depending on how much time we have, if we have. I guess I wanted to ask, what do you see as the value of your work now, especially your writing? And I mean, you mentioned this before, so it could have sounded like I'm asking you to big up yourself, but it's not. It's because I've heard that critique, your own self-critique, of I've written this work, but the people that I've written about cannot read it. And at the moment, I think I first heard you with that critique, you were much harsher towards yourself. Mm. And of course, that registers strangely as somebody who has benefited so much from your intellectual work, and thinking that I could not walk the road I am walking unless you had cleared that ground and had those thoughts. Do you understand the value of your work, and what do you understand of it now?
Well, I'm beginning to understand the work. There's a gentleman here. I hope he doesn't mind my talking about a conversation we had. Because he just told me, asked me if I'm the person who wrote Yards in the City of Kingston. To which I understood, yes, and he said he's lost his copy, and he was so sad he lost his copy. And that reading that thing helped him to do a job which he had to do. No, that made me feel good. That bigged me up big time, yes. So I listen to those things, and it's not just Jamaica. I listen to those things, and I say, you have done your work, which is why I'm not so sorry now when I decide that somebody has to come after me. I think I've done my work.
I absolutely think you have, and I thank you that you have. All right, so we are, I'm very sorry. We're just going to wrap up. What? Oh, we can go to audience question?
Yes, so we have 20 minutes Q&A.
Okay,
and
yeah.
we're going to go to audience questions. There's a mic on both sides, so just show your hand, raise your hands if you have a question.
There's one here in front. And she going to speak it rather than dance it.
Thank you. I'd love to dance it.
How are you doing?
And maybe I do. Because the question I have is, how does one know whether one is emancipated, or at what point you are in the journey? What else may need to be done? Is emancipation about having enough money to do what you want to do? Is it about getting the money by any means possible, which is what our history is essentially about? And so really that's my question. How do you know? And I'm looking on this locally, and I'm looking on it globally, because I'm also looking on other countries who have gone kind of our way in history from start to where we are now, and that's like South Africa and Haiti and us.
Well, emancipation, I'm glad to see you. I haven't seen you in a long, long time. I'm not watching TV, so I not see you dancing in your shorts on TV any longer. Okay, yeah. For me, emancipation is, or an emancipated person can make the link respectfully between themselves and them grandmother and them great-grandmother. That is one of the things. And you can walk proud, or you can walk in your own hair. That's one of the things. And you're not afraid of koro. I'd call yourself koro face. Is your face and it black and it beautiful. So all of this, the reclaiming yourself, and it's not an easy task. Reclaiming yourself is for me what I think. Reclaiming yourself and reclaiming your connection with those past people. That for me is emancipation. It seems simple, but it is not very simple. Not simple at all. Not at all.
Yeah. But you know, Yvonne, one thing that I love to say, and I know it feels stupid saying this to Jamaica, because you can't imagine it, but growing up in any Jamaican school, how you are called to order, if you had an all-girls school and them giving trouble, the teacher walking, ladies, and you stand up straight immediately, or you know, if it's a boys' school, like, well, gentlemen. And I just wonder about that, the lady and the gentleman as the model of the human. That is the only way we imagine accomplishment as human, that there's no other model. And lady and gentleman come from a certain tradition. And I just wonder, what other way can I be fully human? But I don't intend to be a gentleman. I don't intend to wear a tall suit and a top hat. What are the other models of humanity that exist that are not encoded in those very polite British terms of respectability that still allow me to be human, but not in that conception? That's all I want. One way to say that I am human without that.
In the class, when teacher come and say, ladies and gentlemen, if one boy put his hand around the shoulder of another one and say, how you going? That is part of it.
Yes. I mean, God, if we could get to that. But yeah. Where's the second question? Sorry.
That might have been the second question.
But we can. Oh, sorry. Yes, go on.
Good evening, Dr. Brodber.
Good evening, sir. I hope I'm not insulting you by calling you sir.
That's okay.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up once in Royal David City,
Yes.
which is now a war zone.
Mm-hmm.
How are we going to get these Jamaican people emancipate religiously? It is just European history that makes this country going along the way, you know. How are we going to get the population to forget about European history and think about African history religiously?
Okay. I empathize with you, and I had it out with some of the, but I didn't have it out because I find the priests whom I talk to, I find them quite nice. Mainly they're ignorant and they understand that. Because I was telling them, when you stand up, this was long ago, but when you stand up there and talk about Jerusalem, Jerusalem, Jerusalem,
Yes.
you know that the newspaper talking about Jerusalem is the same Jerusalem they're talking about? You have a responsibility to these people to tell them what you mean when you say Jerusalem, Jerusalem, Jerusalem. Okay. That is what I tell them. And I forget, I was going to say something else, but I forget what it was. Okay. To your question about, what is the same kind of thing of letting people understand another way of looking at the Bible. I stand here and I really and truthfully, I love the Bible, but it has done some great, 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 great ills to us, black people. It really has not helped us very much. Okay. So we also probably need to have our interpretation. Everybody has theirs. Our interpretation of the Bible. And I'm not talking about putting the Bible in patois. I'm talking about what did it mean when it was Peter went up, the transfiguration, which is an extreme thing to me, the transfiguration. What did the transfiguration mean? When Peter saw these old ancestors and said, let us build 3 tabernacles. For me, he didn't know what else to say. He was just so amazed at what was happening that he wanted to bring it down to something that he understands. And tabernacle is something he understands. So he said, let us build 3 tabernacles. But this is just me. But I know that nearly everybody reads the Bible and they put their own spin on it. And I'm not quite sure that the spin is something that is healthy and helpful. So I believe that we really and truthfully have to go into the Bible and know ourselves and find the selves that is ours in the Bible. Because people are not going to throw it away. Nor should they, because some of it is quite nice. Yes, sir, that is me and you and the Bible. And the church and the religion.
There you go.
Yeah, can you hear me? Good evening, Dr. Brodber. I'm from St. Mary.
Yes, sir. St. Mary we come from.
Definitely. And listening to you talk just reminded me of a conversation I had with my own grandma. So my question for you is, you talk a lot about the story of St. Mary people, and I'm wondering if you're encouraging us to get granular and get specific with the communities and parishes that we're from, and that those stories aren't to necessarily be subsumed in the more macroscopic story of the Jamaican people. What do you think of how granular we need to get with where we're from, and whether that is an important part of understanding our identity?
I have to admit, I don't know that word, the granular. And I can't answer it fully because I don't know the word. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but what? The nitty-gritty as in grain. All right, okay. Yes. All right. Well, of course. You come from St. Mary. What part of St. Mary you come from?
From Galena.
From Galena?
Yeah, from Galena.
Okay, well. Huh?
See me here.
Oh, is you that?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, we need every bit of history that we can get. We need every bit of it. So if you want to write St. Mary's history and you want to write about Galena, thank you very much. Do it. Do it. And don't be worried about the fact of having to use government papers, the government archives. We are not in the archives. The most time we're in the archives is as percentage. 40% of us were slaves. That is the farthest we're reaching in those things. If we want to know ourselves, we have to ask each other. You have to ask your granny, and you have to ask your granny what she did say, and her grandmother did say. And that is the way we have to do it. And then that don't stop you from going to the archives. When you have got that, you can go and correct it if you want to in the archives. But we need to begin, and we cannot wait. We cannot wait. You need to write the thing for that place where you come from. And if everybody just write the village thing, we can put it together. And we can get a history of St. Mary. That makes sense. A history of St. Mary that is not about banana, the banana business. Because we were only carrying banana per our head. Okay. We never own it. All right. And the same thing for St. Catherine and for wherever it is. When I tell you, when I was doing honors history, went to school to do honors history, there was no Caribbean history. All I was getting when I came out after 3 years with a very good degree was the foreign policy of England. And since then, a lot of people have graduated and have been writing the history. You have to do it. You can't wait on anybody. You have to do it. And what is your name? Because I run you down. Andrew what?
Andre Robb.
Andre Robb. Well, Andre Robb, anytime you see me again, you either run or you tell me what you have done.
All right, it's a deal.
We have time for about 2 to 3 more questions. Just raise your hands.
2 more. Carolyn has a question up here.
What if we can answer her with our big word then?
Oh, God.
It's not a question, it's just a comment, to say that, as you know, I used to teach Jane and Louisa Will Soon Come Home, that powerful novel. And every year I would take the students on a field trip to St. Mary to come to talk to you. We didn't do that as much as we should in literature. The people in science are always doing field trip. Many of the students from Kingston said it was the first time they'd ever gone to St. Mary. Many of these young people, they grew up in Kingston, they don't know anywhere else. And what I just want to thank you for is the way in which you introduce so many of our UE students to the powerful work you were doing in St. Mary. And when they came back to class, their attitude was, no, they understood the novel, because they had been to the space, as you'd say, the granular experience. And I just want to thank you for all that you have done for so many of us younger people, not much younger, not really much younger than you, but the next generation who have learned from actually coming to Woodside and finding out the value of the history and community that you affirm.
Thank you, Carolyn. Some of your students do write me, I have a couple letters from students of yours saying the same thing. And I will not forget, Carolyn, how you advise them that they can go in and use a pit toilet, that it's clean. I suppose many of them never heard of pit toilet. Extend their knowledge of what is.
Amen, Shannon.
Yes, thank you so much for that discussion. I actually came down to Woodside on Thursday with Carolyn, and that was really special to see how you get, the community has organized around memory. Thinking about what Dr. Cooper just said about how a lot of people in, say, my generation, it's more like their parents or maybe grandparents are from, say, more rural communities. Like my dad is from more St. Elizabeth, my mom is from St. Mary. So I feel like there's kind of like a degree of separation. And I feel like I kind of came to curiosity about my my ancestors or like my grandparents' stories even a bit late, and now some of them have dementia, for example, or things like that. So what would you say to people who are trying to now reclaim that, but it feels like it's grasping at straws a bit, or how can you kind of go back to that?
Well, you have to keep on grasping. What else are you going to do? And I would invite you to try see if you can come back to the old people's home from time to time. Just come back and make the people see you and see how it goes. Okay? Because there is this distinction between country and town. And it is a real one. Because in a sense, it's the people who are the man with the drop short leg, who didn't think he could make it in Kingston, is him stay back in country. And there's a limit to how much he can do. So the people you find stay back in the country now are people who don't really have it. So we want you people who have left country, come into town, turn big people, to turn your eye back, to where your people come from, and make people see you, and see how it go, and how it can go.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brodber, Kei Miller. Did you enjoy the conversation? Please. At this time, we're going to take a 10-minute break, but there are a few things I want to share. There are some food and refreshments located to my right. There's not very much, but for those of you who can make it in time, there's vegetable soup, some saltfish fritters and vegetable spring rolls. There are 2 bars. There are also books for sale. There's PREE Bookmark. There's School of Instructions by Ashton Hutchinson. And everyone knows I'm a Haunting by Shivani Ramnachan. There's also the galleries are going to be open, and you feel free to peruse until the break ends, and then again at the end of the show. So we will resume in 10 minutes with a conversation between Annie Paul, Roland Watson Grant, and Garnette Cadogan. Thank you. We're about to resume in 5 minutes. I'm asking all readers to stand by. Annie, Roland, Garnette, please stand by. We are about to begin in 5 minutes. Good evening again, everyone. We are ready to begin the second segment. And we're going to start with a reading from Garnette Cadogan. Born and raised in Kingston, Jamaica, Garnette Cadogan is an essayist who is especially drawn to writing about cities, culture, and the arts. His research explores the promise and perils of urban life, the vitality and inequality of cities, and the challenges of pluralism. Named by the literary magazine Freeman's as one of 29 writers from around the world who, and I quote, represent the future of new writing, end quote, he writes about culture and the arts for various publications. Additionally, and I think for Garnette more importantly, he's a Tony Lee Distinguished Lecturer in Urbanism at the School of Architecture and Planning at MIT. Please make him welcome. Please make him welcome. Keep clapping, keep the applause going. I'm asking everyone to take your seats. I'm also asking that the gallery lights are off at this time. Viewing will resume at the end of the program. Garnette Cadogan, everyone, please make him welcome.
Thank you all for coming and sitting through this heat to hear me. Hope I won't disappoint you. Oh, can you hear me now? All right. I'm actually a lot more intelligent when you can't hear what I'm saying. So, thank you all for coming. There's a category of writing about family in which it's can't live with them, can't live without them. I generally write in a different category. Family, can't live with them, can't live with them. And so this is one of my pieces from that, which is going to make its way in a book of essays at some point. Can you hear me? Can you hear me in the back? All right. All right, thanks, Carolyn. I never know how to answer this question often put to me. Is it Garnette or Garnette? I usually say Garnette, rushing through the last syllable as if gobbling it up rather than lay it out. Sometimes probably prompting people to mishear it as Garnette. Perhaps it's the way I garble my words. My sister Renee says my speech sounds like you're talking with hot food in your mouth. That leads people to call me Garrett, Granette, Garfield, Garland, Garnash, and even Garnish. I answer to all of them, as long as I know it's me being referred to. And don't object unless the name is truly undesirable, like one a Japanese ESL student bestowed on me, apparently having forgotten to swap a mnemonic with the real thing, and so she called me Garbage. But my mushmouth tendencies aside, I hardly know how to properly pronounce my own name. After all, it was thrust upon 9-year-old me one Christmas holiday. My mother came home one day with a Mr. Cadogan, who had lived with us briefly when she dated him a year or so before, but who was so dreadful that my grandmother and I celebrated when he departed. But now he was back, and for good, apparently. They were now married. His scent had even settled into the living room before he began to pump joy out of the house. He did this by force, and I had to memorize Garnette Neon Cadogan. And when I headed back to school after the break, I was to instruct my teachers and classmates that I was no longer to be called Ethan Brian Levy. New year, new name. My new middle name, Neon, suggested as much. With its origins in the Greek adjective neos, it meant something new. I was so busy trying not to forget my new name and getting over the oddness of the middle name. Wait, you mean like the loud lights? My friends joked. What kind of fluorescent name that, Ethan? That I never thought to ask which syllable of my first name I should lean on. I learned my new name, but a lot of my classmates weren't going to go to the trouble. They insisted on calling me Ethan Levy. And if it wasn't confusing enough for me to be calling myself one name while they were calling me another. At home, the only name my brother, mother, stepfather, and grandmother would call me was Chris. My mother went to the trouble of legally changing my name to Garnette, but somehow didn't think to assign me the name Chris, the name that I've been called since a baby. As it was told to me when I got home from the hospital, my grandmother didn't think much of the name I'd been given, nor of the man I'd inherited it from, so she decided she would call me Christopher. My mother, who had fallen out with my father before I was born, settled for, perhaps even liked the name Ethan. But my grandmother, she refused to call me that. My grandmother resorted to a stealthy obstinacy. She said Christopher often and persistently enough that my mother, out of exasperation, decided that Christopher would be my pet name. And over time, its diminutive became the only tag family or close neighbors would call me. To be precise, though, my mother had 3 other constant go-tos. When playful, she'd call me Bones because of my skinny frame, or Reds because of my light black complexion. But when angry, she would call me Mr. Blood Clot, creating the ultimate high-low mix. This backfired for both of us one afternoon when she repeatedly called me another curse word, Mr. Bomber Clot, and I ignored her until she said, "Don't you hear me talking to you?" To which I responded, "I thought I was Mr. Blood Clot." That rejoinder ensured that she never again mixed up her curse words when addressing me, and the willing I received guaranteed I would think hard again before being a wise ass to my mother. When I looked closely at the names of my 2 younger brothers, I discovered that they shared the initials G and C. So, Garnette Cadogan, for consistency's sake, I guess. But my younger brother, whose name was changed from Damien Isaacs to Gavin Cadogan, was, and to this day, is still called Lippy. Called Lippy by the family because a lower lip that hung exaggeratedly when he cried. Almost like an anchor, anxious for the seabed. In Jamaica, it's not unusual to encounter people known to most of their family and friends in a community by a nickname. Their real names submerge except when they pop up on a check or in an obituary. I once taught in a school in which one parent was known to everyone in the community, including his children, as Bagger. One day I mentioned Bagger to the school principal, only for her to flinch and rebuke me for saying his name. I complained, it was a man's name. His child at our school called him by that name after all, and I knew no other for him. She would have none of it, nor would she explain. I asked around, only to find out that Bagger was short for bag of shit. When I bump into certain former classmates, I can't introduce them to people because I only remember them by profanity, or some tame but inappropriate moniker like Blacker, the only name I have for one very dark complexion guy I know. But even in a country where nicknames or pet names are ubiquitous, my family is unusual. None of us, not a single one of us, call the others by their real names. My youngest brother, who has been between stout and fat since he was a baby, has from very early been called Fatter. I have 2 sisters whose real names I sometimes forget because, like everyone else in the family, I call them by their pet names, Tammy and Taz, the latter name and nickname my mother gave because of the Tasmanian Devil cartoon. My mother, whose first and middle birth names are Evan Maria, went by a long-standing pet name, Marlene, when my grandmother affectionately shortened to Mar, and which I began to use in my mid-teens. "Don't call me Mom. Do I look like an old lady to you?" she would complain, being, of course, only 18 years my senior. And my grandmother, who was born Adria Maria Foot, was called Titis, which non-discerning ears, not detecting the 1-2 uneven beat with an emphasis on the second syllable, thought was a reference to her chest, when in fact it was my mother's slight lisp as a baby, trying to say her previous nickname, Mrs., that gave her yet a next nickname. And my mother called her Bigger, a reference to her size that none of us children were allowed to use, not because it was considered offensive, but because it was a term of affection reserved for my mother. Within the family, nicknames were generally a sign of affection. Most of the nicknames originated with my mother, for whom humor seemed to be one of the few displays of affection she was capable of. Directed to people outside the family, however, the nicknames were sine qua non. Following my mother's split from him, my stepfather, whose every other word was a lie, was called Remington Steele. See, some 1980s TV fans here. In a family with so many substitute names, it was easy for me then not to think of my name as anything but a temporary marker. It's something of a mystery why my mother gave me the original name. Could it really have origins as simple as her browsing through a name book for something interesting, as she once said? But what is no mystery is why she changed it. She hated my father, a liar and a cheat, and wanted to be rid of the memory of him. The worst thing I could do as a child was to remind her of him. Like your father was the harshest indictment. Don't behave like your father. Made as much sense to me though as being told, stop speaking Mandarin. Every fault to me was coroner's bequeathed it by him, and she was intent on purging any trace of him from within me. I wasn't sure of what I was to be. I just knew what I wasn't to be. It was identity by negation. People change their names to give themselves a new identity. Some adopt a nom de plume to shape how others see them, to reveal how they see themselves. Samuel Clemens becomes Mark Twain. Marianne Evans becomes George Eliot. David Henry Thoreau becomes Henry David Thoreau. I mean, really, like, be more imaginative, dude. Some desire to throw off a name they don't like, or a name so offensive and alienating they consider it a slave name. In the popular 1970s series, Roots, one of the most gut-wrenching scenes is of the slave Kunta Kinte being violently whipped for refusing to accept his name, Toby. Some change their names after religious conversion. Cassius Clay becomes Muhammad Ali, Ferdinand Lewis Alinchdor Jr. becomes Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Some take on a new name to project a more alluring persona. Robert Zimmerman becomes Bob Dylan. Declan Patrick McManus becomes Elvis Costello. And some people are given names that are about their purpose, their fate. In Genesis, Abraham, exalted father, becomes Abraham, father of multitudes. Sarai, princess, becomes Sarah, mother of many. Whether for reasons religious, political, or artistic, name changes are about assuming identity. But Ethan Levy became Garnette Cadogan, not to give him a new identity, but because his mother wanted to give herself a new identity, one scrub of the memory of his father. Thank you.
Can we hear it again for Garnette Cadogan? Thank you. Garnette will now be joined by Roland Watson Grant and Annie Paul for a conversation titled Wither the Caribbean Tradition. Annie Paul, oh, there she is. Clap her as she approaches. I know Annie is near and dear to many of us here, but I am going to introduce her properly. Annie is an India-born, Kingston-based writer and critic who was editor of the UWI journal Social and Economic Studies until she retired in 2021. She was a 2023 Lakes Writer-in-Resident at Smith College in the United States, where she taught a course called Writing Because. And in 2020, she published a biography of Stuart Hall in UWI Press's Caribbean Biography series. Most of us know that Annie is also editor-in-chief of the online literary magazine PREE and a founding editor of Small Axe. Her writings have been published in international journals and magazines such as Newsweek International, The Guardian, Chimurenga, The Caravan, Slavery and Abolition, Art Journal, South Atlantic Quarterly, Wasafiri, Callaloo, and Bomb, and a range of art books and catalogs such as the Brooklyn Museum's Infinite Island and Documenta 11's Creolite and Creolization. In 2022, Annie edited and published a selection from the first 5 issues of PREE called Bookmarked, which are also on sale here. And earlier this year, her article, Letter from Kingston on the Current State of Jamaican Art, was published in the contemporary art journal, Wasafiri. Annie also sits on the board of the National Gallery of Jamaica and is author of the blog Active Voice. Another round of applause for Annie. Roland Watson Grant is a Jamaican novelist, screenwriter, and travel writer. His first novel, Sketcher, was published in 2013 by Alma Books in the UK and has been translated into Turkish and Spanish. Skid, his second novel, was published in 2015 by Alma Books, also in the UK. In 2017, Roland was shortlisted for the Commonwealth Short Story Prize, and in 2021, his short story, The Disappearance of Mumadel, won the Caribbean Regional Prize for the Commonwealth Short Story Prize. Clap him. And in 2019, Roland was awarded a Musgrave Award for Literature by the Institute of Jamaica, and his nonfiction work has been archived by the Smithsonian Libraries. A round of applause for all three as they engage in conversation with the Caribbean tradition.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for staying. It's wonderful to have you all as an audience. I'm sort of the moderator participant in this discussion. So we are missing very much Nadi Edwards, who would have been the fourth panelist, and especially because Nadi would have contextualized the Caribbean essay almost like decade by decade. That was what he was planning to do. But Garnette, you and Nadi, so when we started PREE in 2018, I am fundamentally a nonfiction writer, and I love the essay. When I studied English literature in India at Delhi University, not a single Indian writer was taught, by the way. That was in the 70s. But it really came to life for me when we studied the essay, and we were studying people like Charles Lamb, Joseph Addison, Richard Steele, and then later G.K. Chesterton. I think he was American, was he? No, he's British too. Yeah, but these were, I mean, the first three I mentioned were 18th century essayists. And what amazed me about, and Hazlitt was another essayist as well, probably from a different century. But with all those essays, what I really was astonished by was how contemporary they were, you know? It's a form which no matter how old, I mean, the person may have, so I'm writing today, or if you're a very good essayist and you're writing in the 20th century or 21st century, someone in the 25th century should be able to read those essays and still be able to imagine and recreate the world that you lived in when you wrote those essays. That, to me, is the sign of a very good essay. But when we started PREE in 2018, I was looking forward to a very vibrant nonfiction section. And to my disappointment, that has not happened. You know, we're much more, we get many more submissions in the fiction, and astonishingly, well, not astonishingly, knowing Jamaica, in the poetry category. Everyone thinks they're a poet, and or they think that poetry is easy to write or something. So we get bombarded with poetry. Very few essays. And so, in fact, Garnette, Nadi, and I, and Kei, have been talking about starting a spin-off of, from PREE, which would just contain essays, right? And Garnette, can you talk a little bit about, you and Nadi in particular have been going back and forth about this. Tell us some of what you've been discussing.
Well, we've been thinking about, you know, what it means to, you know, understand the rich contribution the Caribbean has made to the essay. Something that people tend to forget. You think of, I mean, I'm always arguing and fighting with, and sometimes throwing him across the room. But Naipaul, you know, Walcott, you know, Edwidge Danticat, you know, Patrick Chamossier, you know, even, you know, more straddling the line between academic and a general audience, you know, Glissant, you know, Aimé Césaire, and that's just to speak of the English and, you know, the French tradition. I mean, there is, you know, a lot of contemporary, you know, essays working out. Carina del Valle Shorsky, you know, Puerto Rico, but writing in English. You know, Edwidge again, you know, writing English. Kei, who must be somewhere hiding in embarrassment that they call him out from the stage. Aishan, also, that people forget that Aishan is a wonderful essayist, in addition to being an incredible poet. And so, part of it is not only trying to cultivate the tradition, but sometimes just turning the spotlight a little to say, hey, remember, Aishan is an incredibly wonderful and beautiful essayist who writes, with incredible, in a precision, in a sense of fluidity that's present, with him as an essayist, in a way that's, fruitfully, different from how he's, as a poet, and so part of it was to, show, what is actually happening in the world of essays, the world of letters from Caribbean essayists now, to look back in that wonderful essays, from times past, and then also to try to pry open the gate and said, come, there's room for a lot more. And so to do that, partly, by beginning to reflect on, some of the great essays of the past, this is on my mind because I've been talking about it with some of the wonderful people in the workshop. Tedrick Cole reflecting on Baldwin's Stranger in the Village in his essay Black Boy. And so Nadi and I were saying, maybe we begin first by choosing some what we think are canonical Caribbean essays and begin first by reflecting on those essays and then, going from historical reflection to start saying, come, let's begin writing and open up, the
What
world
some of the
this.
canonical Caribbean essayists?
Some of the,
Who are some of the canonical, like
Naipaul,
Roller, maybe?
Yeah, Gordon Roller,
Even Walcott.
Walcott, yeah. Then of course, without question, Jamaica Kincaid, who's incredible. Yeah, Sylvia Winter.
Right.
Yes. Shout out some more from the audience. Yeah.
Yeah, no. Sylvia Winter is somebody you simply cannot ignore.
Yeah.
Her essays are amazing, and they were first published in Jamaica Journal.
Yes. Yeah.
From Haiti. No, from Martinique. Yeah.
Yeah. And the tradition goes, far and wide. Exactly. Thank you.
Who?
Yes, Sam Selvon, exactly. There's also something to think about in terms of thinking about the essay. It's not merely the essay, but people who in their novels, have an essayist tradition. We think now of, Sebald, for example, who sometimes has essayistic mood, or Rachel Cusk, or, Zadie Smith. But you look at, Selvon's, novels, and there's a, rich essayistic tradition, at work in a novel. So part of it also is not just to see the essay in nonfiction, it's to see the shadow of the essay, the way the shadow of the essay, reaches over verse, the way it reaches over even academic treatises, the way it reaches into the novel, into the short story. And so the essay, the essay is a vagabond. The essay is a vagabond in its very form itself, but the essay is a vagabond in the places in which it will try to reach and in how it pulls from other genres, but also how it infiltrates and wanders in and out of other genres. So to read Selvon and to read Selvon's fiction is to also see Selvon writing as a novelist, but also writing as an essayist at the same time. And so part of what Nadi and I are also thinking is not merely to speak of the essays just existing in nonfiction, but to actually also reflect on how the essay itself bleeds into other genres, as it also borrows from other genres.
Right. And I'm thinking of Roland. This is a good place to bring Roland in, because Roland is primarily known as a fiction writer, but he did write this amazing essay on his father, the Obia man. And then now you have other travel essays. But tell us how you began to branch into nonfiction.
Well, I'm happy with what Garnette said, that it bleeds from other genres, and you have a kind of reciprocity happening. I took a while to write nonfiction, but the first fiction work that I did, short story, first novel, the question I always get is, how much of this is true? How much of that is true? And at one point, I tried to be mathematical about it, and I said that maybe 65% all the things with a boy drawing things and it becoming real. That part isn't true. But everything else that has to do with family belief, how belief basically compasses our lives. All those things are true. And so I grew up in a situation where you had two kinds of opposing forces. And one was folk belief, Obia, on my father's side, and my mother was fundamentalist, Christian. And in the middle there, you have a nice little melting pot of everything. And I only learned to appreciate folk teaching at a later stage when I became an adult. Now, everything else before that was fundamentalist to the T, everything else you reject. And that also means rejecting a very large part of your heritage because everything was Eurocentric. And so we grew up, the fundamentalist church that I grew up in was actually across the street from Jack Scorpio. I don't know how many people know Jack Scorpio sound system, but you can imagine the sort of absolute spiritual warfare as far as the church persons were concerned. Because as soon as Vesper starts happening and Jack Scorpio turn on the sound system, he's like, the church finished worship yet? And they turn on the sound system. And at one point, I remember the kete drum rhythm had come out. And that rhythm starts. And there was a point when, after Vespers, when we just had a very Eurocentric hymns being sung, when that kete drum started, there was a moment that was spiritual. And I said, I feel that. That's across the street. So there was always that tug of war happening. And I think finally, it made itself into fiction. But then after that, when I said, I know I need to become braver, talk about my father, talk about fundamentalism, it fell into place because I'd had so much practice.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. And what do you think the difference is? We hear increasingly today about creative nonfiction. What is creative nonfiction as opposed to just nonfiction? Garnette?
I may be the wrong person to ask because
Really?
I'm allergic to that term.
Okay.
I already think that nonfiction, is already, you're defining a genre by negation, that it's by not what it is, and then to add the creative on it as if nonfiction on its own wasn't already a creative enterprise to begin with. I do know that at least in the U.S. historically, the term itself is tied to a certain institutional history. That when writing programs started entering the curriculum and the emergence of writing programs in nonfiction, and particularly a way of getting institutional legitimacy, and then of course with that enrollment support, that the term itself became particularly useful for that. So I'm not going to knock on next man's hustle, but for describing what it is that's done, I find the term a non sequitur, that already nonfiction is being described in a way that already put it in negative terms, and that what is under that umbrella already at nonfiction is this incredibly rich and fruitful and phenomenal panoply of marvelous, wonderful work that doesn't necessarily mean creative before it. So in other words, what's creative nonfiction before nonfiction is nonfiction is nonfiction and creative. To think of just look at the essay. How might you look at somebody say Virginia Woolf or Jamaica Kincaid, or Hilton Als, the nonfiction that they do, and the work that's been called nonfiction versus what is creative nonfiction. Is it any more creative than the incredible work that is being done there? So for me, I find the term unnecessary baggage, and part of my, maybe it's just working as an educator where continually my students are always reminding me, keep it simple, and so for me, I sort of dispose of the term and distinct nonfiction and understand that the term itself originating from institutional aims, it's not really particularly useful to me, if useful to these programs.
Thank you. I remember Kei saying that, Kei is so multifaceted as a writer. He's a poet, he's a novelist, then he's an essayist, and he does all of them well. But he said after doing the book of essays, or one or the second one, that it's his favorite genre, What about you, Roland? You've dabbled in nonfiction, and you've mastered fiction.
Yes.
What draws you to nonfiction?
I think there's a certain level of truth that you can tell in fiction, but then there comes a particular place where the gears that you can change in nonfiction to switch the voice and to speak of different things in a very 360 way do not exist in fiction, because you have to follow the story of your characters and they have to come out with some kind of outcome. In nonfiction, you can always move the needle a bit to get out of the story that you're telling, speak with your own voice, get back into that story. And I think one of the things that resonated with me as a fiction writer is Richard Powers, who wrote the Out story. He won the Pulitzer Prize in 2019.
Echo Maker.
The Over story. The Over story. He said, all the arguments in the world, all the convincing arguments in the world will not really convince people. I'm paraphrasing. Will not really convince people, but a story will. So when you use a story within nonfiction, it has a way of amplifying and speaking to what exactly the point that you want to make. And I heard, Garnette said earlier, creative nonfiction, and I do appreciate where you began to say where that term was coined. But I borrow so much from a creative way as a function of writing nonfiction that I think it adds a particular quality to it that makes you realize that the magical is always within the mundane. For example, if we are talking about the fact that the utility poles have not been changed in many years, and there are these moths gathered around the wires, and we say they're like old men's beards, then we are still using the metaphorical, we're still using the magical. And I think while you have to be very sparing with that, it is creative in a sense, even though I should talk to you some more about where that creative nonfiction name began.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. But one of the things that has struck me is that Jamaica, although we have contemporary essayists like Kei and yourself and others, there's a way in which the essay wasn't practiced here in the same way as it seems to have been in Trinidad. You had TNT Review, Lloyd Best's TNT Review, and various other such journals and magazines where you had essays, proper essays, being published regularly. I don't know whether this ever happened in Jamaica.
Yeah, there are early literature. It's slipping my brain now. I'm not sure why. Maybe I'm going to blame it on the heat. I can blame it on the heat or on my age. I'm going to go the way of vanity and blame it on the heat. But there, in earlier publications, like even early Jamaica journals, there are different appearances.
Sylvia Winter.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
And so, but nowhere in Trinidad that had a rich, productive essayistic tradition there.
Like decade after decade. Yeah.
But like Cuba, Trinidad, Martinique seems to have had long threads of the essay to be apparent. Because even some of the people I'm mentioning, for example, I mentioned Edwards in Jamaica. In many ways, they bloomed as essayists away from the Caribbean, even though the Caribbean is central, to their to their writing pursuits and central to their themes and as objects of their attention. But in the Caribbean, developing and cultivating and finding rich expression in that tradition, it's generally been in Trinidad, in Martinique, and Cuba.
So how would we go about reviving this tradition? That's our final question. And then we'll open up to the audience for questions and comments.
Well, I think one have to make a case. Well, actually, first we have to make a case, for the presence of the essay, and that people are actually more familiar with the essay than they think. I don't mean to embarrass you, but I mean to embarrass you. So if you look, for example, at Carolyn's commentary, there's, you come to the essay, to see a mind at work and to see the mind unfold over the arc of the page. So, for example, I make a distinction between, say, memoir and the essay. And an essay can be memoiristic, but in a memoir, you come in to have an experience with biography or autobiography. What distinguishes the essay more than anything else is the unfolding of a mind. Is moving on a journey with that mind, and so it's unfolding. And so, for example, I remember earlier Kei speaking about out of many, one people. I remember Carolyn writing about that once. And so you're going, and it's not merely in an opinion piece to say, I want you to think this, or I want to argument, proof, QED, done. The essay is like, come, follow my mind, move alongside me in lockstep and see how my mind is unfolded. So the turns, to the detours, to the maneuvers. And so, you're seeing the essay and the quality of the essay showing up in commentary, with Carolyn, for example. You're seeing the essay show up with people who, we don't recognize or know as essayists, like Aishan, you're an essayist along with being a poet. And so part of it is, first, as I said, pointed to people the places in which they already have that experience with the essay, and to say, think about that enriching experience. Somebody didn't just merely say, this is the story, these are the facts I want you to believe. Somebody saying, come with me, let me take you, on this journey. Let you see the movement, the zigzag of the mind. I think one of my favorite books is Italo Calvino's Invisible Cities. When he goes through, multiple cities, these imagined cities, in Genghis Khan, talk to Marco Polo. And in it, my favorite city is a city called Esmeralda, in which, he keeps saying, people in Esmeralda go from place to place, but they never take the same route, every 2 days. It's a zigzag city, going in any manner of twists and turns and meanders and, wanderings. And that's very much the essay. That's one of the reasons why the essay is so accommodating to wandering, so accommodating to digressions,
there's no plot necessarily.
Yeah, or if there's a plot, you're still happy to follow along. Like the journey is, a huge part of it. It also explains sometimes why, I'll have fights or arguments in my mind. Like with in New York, I'm like, okay, fine, nice long journey, but like, are we getting somewhere? Like, is there argument here? And so, what happens, with that, is that it invites you to a place of movement, of seeing the movement of someone's mind. And so one is pointing out the places where it exists and the richness of it and say, do you not want more? The second is beginning to make a case for the essay that people have this, people are still very much attached to the idea of the essay that they got in high school, the 5-paragraph essay. And we often think of the essay around gatekeeping. The essay is often something standing in the way of you getting in or getting out. So you think of university. You need to write that essay to get, at least American and British universities, you need to write an essay to get in, and then you need to write an essay to get out. You want a grant, you have to write some in application essay. You want some money, it always feels like the essay is like the worst kind of bouncer. It's like, satisfy my demands, you get in. And so we begin associating the essay with a gatekeeper, with, the most cruel kind of bouncer. And so part of it is beginning to actually open up, people's, understanding of what the essay is. It's not that straitjacket that you were taught about in high school. And so if you start thinking of the essay as a place of freedom, as a place of discovery, as a place of exploration, as a place of playfulness, as a place of happy misdirection, as a place in which you can make an argument in indelible ways, of a way to do incredible things with time, as a place in which many genres can be folded in and meet, as the ultimate mashup and the mixtape, then suddenly it becomes a much more inviting thing, a much more inviting genre. It becomes actually a genre rather than the straitjacket that we've been taught for too long it is.
Thank you. I think it's a good time to see if there are any comments or questions.
We have time for about 3 brief comments or questions.
Yeah.
Somebody showing a middle finger in the back there?
Yeah.
Oh, hi. Sorry, I don't want to interrupt.
We'll come to you after.
Yes, hi. So this is so interesting to me. I think my favorite essays blend genre, so like fiction and poetry and even lyricism. And I wanted to ask you all, when you're writing essays, is that an intention that you set? Like you want to experiment and play? How do you start on the page of playing and like meandering and journeying and zigzagging? What is your approach when you're writing essays, basically?
I think just like fiction, I begin with an image. There are many times I begin with an image, and sometimes that image is related to a particular time in your life where you put it back here, that memory, but it keeps coming back. Every time you go into that mental grab bag, you're going to get that image. And many times I realize I begin there, or I begin with a particular thought that I've discarded, and it keeps coming back. And because it haunts you, you're going to write about it. And it's basic, but it really is something that happens with me.
So I think about process. One of the beautiful things about the essay is maybe the one genre that's really forgiving about process, about including your process. So we often think, this is how I started thinking about the story. This is what I was researching, and I hit all these walls, I started over, and so you're writing an op-ed piece. Nobody wants to hear that. In a novel, nobody wants to hear that. But in an essay, that's gold. It's like, oh, I was talking to Carolyn, and she cracked this joke, and I remember this old joke, and it makes me start thinking about the history of jokes, and then I'm discovering this folk tradition, and I'm researching, and I was going to write about the history of jokes, but then suddenly my friend said, you're not funny. You can't tell about the history of joke. Find something else. And then suddenly I'm writing about the history of Wales. But in an essay, all of that lead up, what in everything else, every other genre, with pre-story that need to cut in the essay, this is gold. Because the essay insists on journey. The essay insists on you keeping company with somebody else's mind. And so it then means, sometimes what is the detours of a next person's in a mind, or even the same mind, with a different genre gets involved here. So the way I begin is many times, the instant I start thinking of something, I start jotting down or mapping the process, recognizing the process itself might be useful. But the way I start, which sometimes is really frustrating to editors when they call and they say, can we see the draft where you're at, is that I begin all my essays with a word cloud. So I literally start thinking, I remember this image, I remember this mood, I remember this character. So I often think the thing most important thing is image, mood, idea, in a time as in a chronology, and then there's a character and character. And so I just started writing a word cloud with all of them, and then make it swirl and swirl and swirl as I'm jotting down and thinking through the process. And the things that start flashing the brightest in that word cloud, I start saying, here is this, here is this, here is this, here is this. And then I keep having it swirl until I have an opening paragraph. And the way I think of the opening paragraph, at least with the kind of essays I write, is that I want the opening paragraph to contain the leitmotifs that run through the whole essay. So I think of the opening paragraph as this flashlight that shines all the way through to the end. To say, you can look at my opening paragraph and get a sense of the kind of mood. Because for me, the single most important thing, at least for me in an essay, is voice. Like, there are essays where I'm like, this guy's an idiot. I don't agree with this. But his voice, or her voice, or their voice, is so compelling to me that I will keep company with this voice. Even if the end I said, you don't know what you talk about. But the way you talk about it, I'm here for it. And so, so I do that until I keep sorting and say, I found the voice and I found the leitmotifs, and then I start unpacking and moving from that. But always thinking, what journey can I take you on, and and how do I begin getting you there?
Yeah, for me, I worked in an academic environment for over 3 decades. And so I got into the habit of, using abstracts. Because when you're doing academic papers, you often you have to present an abstract. What is this paper or presentation about? You encapsulate that in the abstract. And you do that in advance of having written the paper. So very often, I find it useful to do that. But by the time I finish the paper, I often have to go and revise the abstract because the abstract no longer, the essay has taken on, or the paper has taken on a life of its own. And so, all you have to do is rewrite the abstract. But let's hear, I think Nolly Moses had a question.
Yeah, no, it's a comment, actually. I just wanted to say that I think we have a few current examples of good creative fiction. I think Jonathan Escoffrey's If I Survive You is one such. I think Zadie Smith's The Fraud, which I'm reading at the moment, is also an idea. There's a Trini writer named Anthony Josephs who wrote a thing called Kitsch, and it says a fictional biography. And then I think Carolyn Cooper and Michael Abrahams, they do some great creative nonfiction essays in their columns every Sunday.
Thank you. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So this is also a question/comment. As we're talking about the essay tradition in Jamaica, a lot of people have mentioned Carolyn Cooper, and for good reason. And I'm thinking of, I guess, the future of the essay in Jamaica. And so I guess my question to the panel is, for upcoming writers like myself who are interested in essay, like Caroline has her blog and she has her column and she's written many books, and for people like me who are not, I don't have a column in a newspaper yet, what would you say, like, how would you encourage younger essayists to, to essentially keep the tradition alive, apart from, yes, continuing to publish, continuing to, continuing to write? What kind of advice do you have for people like me in terms of community building and taking advantage of what else taking advantage of newer technologies, or what else, there is to offer for people like me? Sorry if that wasn't clear.
Who wants to take that?
Well, let me it would be remiss of me not to say that Annie Paul challenged me to write an essay which I had parked for a very long time. It was about adverse childhood experiences, and I think PREE gave me an invitation to face that reality and to speak of whether I had an adverse childhood experience, but something that was too subtle for me to realize until I got an invitation to face that reality. So sometimes it's looking at the people who are creating those opportunities for us to write this. I would encourage you to look at journals worldwide and locally and in the region who accept nonfiction, who accept fiction, when they accept it, at what points do they publish, because they're always accepting things like this. And if you actually have a deadline, not like I always think a deadline is the best thing, but if you have a deadline and you know the quality of what they're looking for, you don't have to try for the New Yorker. Sometimes there are people who actually accept and understand your experience in better ways than the New Yorker can. And I'm going to say that if it's an unpopular opinion, then so be it. But it is to look for these opportunities, and they exist.
But also there's, I would not throw out blogging. And nowadays what people do is called Substack. They're using this new technology called Substack and using it to write essays. So you have to build an audience for your writing, and these are free technologies, right, that you can manipulate and use. And then, of course, you can submit to PREE and platforms like PREE. And the newspapers are dying. I don't think the newspaper columnist is going to last very much longer. It's a dying tradition. Sorry, I'm Caroline. I don't know if you agree, but
well, I think it's a rock stone in Caroline's hand.
But yes, Erna has something to say. Please give Erna the mic.
But I want to take down before.
And that will be the last comment.
Yeah.
We have one hand that was.
Yeah.
That has
Okay.
been-
Okay. Mm.
Before Erna asks, just to say, it's important to build the audience, but I think one thing is especially crucial is that to build community. And so in many times, a writing community begins first with a reading community. So to actually find like-minded friends, and they don't have to be fellow essayists. I mean, there are few things that's enriching for like an essayist to be keeping company with a novelist and a short story writer and in a poet. But to begin having a community that also, like you, love essays and begin reading them, picking them apart. Why does this work? Why doesn't this work? Why does this move me? Why does this arrest me? Why is this still staying in my mind? Why do these stories linger on and I can't arrange myself from it? So find a community that organize around that common interest in which you can encourage each other, share with each other, build up with each other, and then out of that community start pitching the places that are open to essays, whether it be PREE or Beyond the Borders here, places like The Point, Yale Review, Kenyan Review, Boston Review, and there are different types of things with essays, but build that community first, and out of that community, have the writing emerge from like-minded friends that give you support.
I just want to ask if the sermon is an essay.
I think of
If they are, then we have a lot of essays.
So I think of the sermon as a very strong antecedent to the essay, and actually sometimes it is an essay. So if you look, for example, in the American tradition, in the British tradition, even earlier, like Montaigne, people said, oh, you find antecedents of Montaigne in the sermon, in Sophocles, in the aphorisms. And so I think that the essay has very, very, very strong DNA of the sermon running through it. If you even look at the earliest essays, at least in the US, tradition I know the best, outside of the Caribbean, a lot of the early essays were actually, our early essays were sermons, or even a lot of the early anthologies of American essays in our sermons, or even the most recent one by Philip Lopate, who is the biggest collector of essays in terms of anthology. All the early ones are essays. So Cotton Mather, and a number of others. And so I think also in looking at essay in Jamaica and the Caribbean means going back and looking at our sermonic traditions. And actually I'd even go even further and say in Jamaica, dub, like you listen to Lee Scratch Perry and what is happening with dub and Lee Scratch Perry and stuff, I'm saying that's an experimental essay. The way they're doing things with sound, the way he's making meanders and movements and digressions and coming back and finding, as it were, the tonic, that in itself is a kind of essay. And so, yeah, for me, the sermon is an antecedent of the essay and a strong, DNAs, floating around in the essay.
I just want to thank Annie for encouraging me to be a blogger. It has been a wonderful experience, Annie. So me always a big you up and send messages to you to thank you.
Thank you.
I agree with you that the newspaper is dying, but not the newspaper columnist, because the art of writing the essay is staying alive. It doesn't matter what medium you're using. Newspapers may be dead, but the form will continue in other ways. And I just want to encourage you, send some things to the Gleaner. The Gleaner always looking for good writers. I'll talk to you afterwards and link you with the opinion editor.
Was there one last? Shannon?
There was one hand here. So this is going to be the last question comment, and Annie will go to you for closing.
Hi. So I was thinking, I hope this doesn't sound incoherent. So I was thinking about Dr. Brodber's earlier discussion about the accessibility of her work. And I was also thinking about Twitter's fortnightly discussion about how academics don't write in accessible language for the people that it's meant to serve them. So I was wondering what was, and I think it's more the academic side rather than the life writing side of the essaying. So I'm wondering what's your comment or thoughts about that, about language not being accessible and yada yada yada, and yeah, is it not? What do you think?
Well, I don't think academic writing is meant for the general public. So, there are conversations taking place at different levels And so academic writing uses particular jargon, particular vocabularies which are not accessible. And I don't think I don't agree with the idea that academics must all write in an accessible way. Some of them do, and that's wonderful. And it's not easy to do that, by the way. So the ones who do, it's great. What you need really are other writers who are intermediaries between academics and the public, who take what academics do, take what academics write, and translate it for public consumption. I mean, you have, for instance, with all these things, no one ever says that scientists are speaking in an inaccessible language. It's somehow accepted that scientists are entitled to speak in jargon, right? And then you have some people called science writers who translate what they do. I maintain that we need that kind of translation across the board with academia. It's wonderful when someone is able to communicate, like Stuart Hall. Stuart Hall was extremely good at talking to a general public and translating very complex cultural theory into normal language. It's not easy to do.
But I will say this, that academics get a huge knock time and time again, but there are a lot of academics writing wonderfully beautiful prose for a general audience. And this is maybe a concept for a different day, but I also don't really believe so much in this thing called the general audience. And so I think what academics need to do, I mean, if they're talking beyond the community, is to speak to people in other buildings. To use a term a friend of mine, Carlo Rotella, he's like, the geographer just need to speak to the physicists need to speak to the anthropologist to the historian. And many times we speak to people in other buildings by beginning to make it accessible to somebody who is not within your epistemic circle, to use that term, or somebody within your own discipline, others will begin to overhear it and actually begin to understand. And let's not forget, most people writing for, well, I shouldn't say most, that might sound too harsh. Many people writing for a general audience also write pretty terribly. You don't need to be an academic to write bad. Just ask anybody who's ever had to be on a prize judging committee. Or if you're at the admissions in my department, and people are worried about AI doing a lot of the writing. I mean, I'm actually many times more worried about humans doing the writing when I submit the applications. And so, there's good writing and bad writing across the board, and it's to begin to ask, how do we find ways of encouraging good writing and good writers, and how do we find ways of opening the door to give bad writers a forum in which they can improve and become better writers?
Thank you,
Thank you, everyone. I think that's it.
Annie?
Yes, is Isis here?
No, she left.
She left. Okay, Isis was supposed to close. But thank you so much, all of you, for coming. It's been a really stimulating 2 days, 2 evenings. In the daytime, we've had writing studios with many of the people in the audience have been attending. And in the evenings, we've had these public events where we've gathered, all of us, to talk about writing of various kinds and writers. And, I think there's not enough of this happening in Kingston. And I'm so glad that, this has been a heartwarming experience for me as editor of a magazine of writing, to see that there is an enthusiastic public who wants more. For instance, let me tell you, we are very grateful to Carolyn Cooper for mentioning us in her column last Sunday. You won't read about these 2 evenings in the media here, right? Not before, not after. There will be no record of it. Well, Carolyn, with the exception of Carolyn. But that's not good enough. The newspapers are supposed to cover. When you go to where I just went to Bocas in Trinidad, you should see how the media there covers Bocas, which is a literary festival. Every single panel, every single session gets written up in the newspapers there. There is something deeply wrong with the media here. And I just want to, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to end on a political note, but I think I can't help it. So thank you very much for coming, and see some of you tomorrow, and the rest of you on another occasion like this.
Thank you.
Good night, and thanks once again. Huh?
You're right.
I never intended to say that.
Erna, Kei, Roland, Garnette,
Erna,
Caroline, Prof, Caroline. No, on the stage. Kei,